Okay, so some quick disclaimers before we get into it. First, I am playing this game on PC, so this is technically speaking a PC review, and bear that in mind whenever things for stability come up. Other platforms may have different issues. Second, the game is very CPU dependent, and my CPU and my system sucks, so I'm sorry if some of the footage is going to come off as extra crispy. I promise it didn't look like that when I was playing it, and that's not going to affect the review. Third, I have been a huge Halo tard for forever. So, I'm going to still do my absolute best to try and keep my opinion to myself until the bonus content section, but I'm sorry if some of my bias slips out here and there. Now, let's get into it. The game does a decent job of rewarding players that go off of the beaten path. A bit of exploration will almost always yield something fun or useful in the form of equipment, encounters, Easter eggs, or some other collectible. Chief among those collectibles are the Collectible Skulls, which are very well hidden and fundamentally change how the game plays when you choose to activate them. Enemies will dynamically change their behavior relative to the state of the player and the state of the fight that they're in. Behaviors seem to be generally improved and more complex than in previous Halo games. Enemies with carried or worn shields will only activate those shields when they've been engaged. Jackals will switch up their grip on their shield in order to make it harder for you to shoot their hands, and higher-ranking elites will engage active camouflage once enough damage has been dealt to them. The game also does a decent job of introducing new mechanics. A prime example for this is the skewer being the equivalent of a one-hit sniper weapon for enemies in this game, and there's a whole room dedicated to having the player experience that and even use that weapon against them early on. However, there are times when the game feels as though it's punishing you for using the tools at your disposal. Specifically, over many death pits created by fractures in the ring, you'll just be pulled straight down into the pit if you cross over it without a vehicle, even if you were able to make the jump, or if you could have easily saved yourself with the grappling hook. Halo Infinite's level design is split into two main components, a semi-open world and traditional linear levels. I say semi-open because for most of the game, you can only explore sections of it at a time, and the aforementioned death pits largely prevent you from exploring beyond your bounds until you get a flying vehicle late in the game. Or, just do a chopper launch off a mountain or something, but if you have to break the physics engine in order to adequately traverse the world, then there's something horrifically wrong with your level design. The open world is full of enemy patrols, landmarks, varied paths, and different Easter eggs. The octagonal pillars that act as the superstructure of the ring aren't overused often, and in areas where they are, it's justified as being a way that the ring is repairing itself, a trait which isn't shared by any other Halo ring and thus hasn't been seen before. Eventually, all of those pillars are going to intersect with one another and then be covered in natural materials again. The player is even shown the process of these pillars being made, so it isn't left to any sort of confusion or interpretation. The linear design is, for both better and for worse, pure classic Halo. Which does mean that while the experience is curated, structured, and more intentionally designed, especially in terms of encounters, it also means that it can become very repetitive in other places. The glitchiness of Infinite is a well-memed and documented one, but just being able to laugh at it doesn't excuse bad programming. Textures often fail to load, even especially when observing them with a scope, and sometimes they just are outright broken. The game has both frozen and crashed for me before. Vehicles, bodies, and other in-game entities, especially enemies, get clipped through geometry. It's pretty clear that, bug fix-wise, the game was and still is currently unfinished. But at least some of the bugs are funny, and to be fair, it's only ever crashed once across 2 full playthroughs. The equipment is a fresh take on the same concept used in Halo 3, although with the addition of some new and proven ideas, such as the booster from Halos 4 and 5 and the grappling hook popularized by games like Titanfall 2 and Apex Legends. The more expansive world is somewhat betrayed, though, by the slower movement that's more faithful to the original Halo formula, meaning that you tend to become a bit over-reliant on the grappling hook or vehicles for traversal. However, from the other perspective, the world could be seen as being designed in a way to draw you into the new traversal mechanics and force you to use them to their fullest extent. Over-reliance aside, though, the different vehicles offer both a variety of gameplay and a variety of strategies for both traversal and conquest. Want to take down all of the snipers and fuel silos of an area with heavy tank fire? You can do that. Want to bombard enemies from the skies in a vehicle that you stole out of mid-air from an elite? You can do that. Want to squat up in the I'm with my boys mobile with 5 Marines, which you gave tracking rocket launchers and arcane lasers? I mean, if you don't care about your frame rate, feel free to ride that lightning. There are also gun variants for every single gun in the game, which are earned by defeating bosses and earning valor among the Marines you save. So, on top of the otherwise very tight gunplay that Infinite is becoming known for, more variety and power can be afforded to players who are willing to fight for it. The weapon and Brohammer are written very well within the context that they are given, and both serve to contrast Chief as a character. Brohammer's cowardice contrasting Chief's sense of duty, and her optimism contrasting his jaded cynicism. Brohammer's constant complaining is eventually addressed in-universe by Chief himself, which leads to a revelation that both justifies his fears and leads him to becoming more comfortable with the group and more on board with the adventure. His cowardice, and later admission of failure, brings a humanistic edge to the setting of the AIs and super soldiers of the world, and as a result, he brings out Chief's humanity at times, something which has been a major topic of discussion ever since Halo 4. Chief and the weapons dynamic is complex, and centered around the question of trust between the two. The weapon is unaware of Cortana's reasons for going rogue, as well as her intergalactic terrorist activities, which leads her to constantly question why Chief doesn't actually trust her. Chief ultimately attempts to delete her when it appears that she's being corrupted and she's going to fall into enemy hands, thus informing the player about Chief's position on the matter, as well as answering Cortana's question of,
"Could you sacrifice me to complete your mission? Could you watch me die?"
the answer apparently being yes.
We were a team.
Directly segueing from that, arguably the best narrative strength of the game is its use of foreshadowing. The Spartan Killers and Blademaster Yega are foreshadowed through analysis of the Spartan 4s from whom you get your equipment throughout the game. Chief's self-blame and regret for what happened to Cortana is foreshadowed in his interactions with Brohammer. Brohammer's cowardice and reactions to danger and death also foreshadow the revelation that he's just actually a civilian contractor and not really a soldier. And the weapon being a copy of Cortana is foreshadowed by...
There's your grav lift. Let's get this over with.
And remember, you chose this path.
I'm her?
Okay, that one was really stupidly obvious, let's be honest here. But I could write an entire page's worth of foreshadowed events, but the narrative section is long enough as is. The only loss of points in narrative is the fact that the story seemingly kills off both of their established villains off-screen before the game properly begins. We have no investment in Escharum, regardless of him being a good or bad character. Meanwhile, Atriox is known for everything that he had done in the Halo Wars games, and even if he weren't, say you've only played the mainline FPS Halo games, Infinite establishes his threat in the opening cutscene. Meanwhile, Cortana is, as of Halo 5, a newly immortal, megalomaniacal, intergalactic terrorist with planet-busting angel mechs on command. Doing away with both of them leaves the player without a key point of conflict to be invested in, and this gap in writing isn't necessarily justified even when the game explains away their absences later. Although, to end on a high note, the lore implications of the legendary ending are unbelievable for die-hard Halo fans and set the stage for some incredible future campaign stories.
The Criterion has given the order. Offensive bias has been deployed.
The visual design is a return to form for 343, a return to the visual language that defined Halo's visual identity. New weapon designs feel inspired by the past and clearly stand out individually. The sound design is also a mix of Bungie and 343 Halo games. It serves its purpose very well. Each gun and thrown weapon sounds unique and can be distinguished at a distance from sound alone. The classic orchestral and Gregorian harmony is back in terms of music, with minor changes to make this game feel more like its own entry rather than a copy of its predecessors. Even without counting any sort of multiplayer, Infinite is still a good bang for your buck. The first playthrough on Heroic took 17 hours, and my following Legendary playthrough, after knowing everything, took still over 10 hours. To date, I have now played Halo Infinite for 69 hours. in just the first cutscene, I thought, oh, this is so much better than Halo 5. And by the way, bearing in mind, the contrast is you had the big epic fight between the, no really, he's just so cool you guys, Oni Spec Ops wet work agent, Spartan Locke, and the Master Chief, and it was one of the lamest things I've ever seen. You literally have Master Chief getting ragdolled in the starting moments of Infinite. I'm just like, this is so much better. I think this is really a step in the right direction that 343 needed. Like, not just to earn back the faith of the community, but also to, like, have their own confidence in making Halo games cemented. Because it really seems like they lost their way in Halo 4 and 5. Well, 5 specifically. Halo 5 didn't feel like a sequel. Because, like, the impetus for the whole story, Cortana going rogue, and also, you know, being alive, and Chief going AWOL to go save her, Blue Team getting introduced, all those other, like, all that stuff happened off-screen, and Halo 5 is a follow-up to all of those events, not to Halo 4's events. Meanwhile, Infinite feels like a real sequel to, like, the legendary ending of Halo 5, and a follow-up from the Halo Wars games. And also, the dialogue is great. The grunts are hilarious. Escharum, despite feeling kind of like he's shoehorned in, is a good character, and he really makes you feel for this old, honor-bound war chief who literally just wants to die on the battlefield like a hero. And Chief sympathizes with that. Like, no, he's not a monster. He's just another soldier who was trying, you know, who was hoping he'd done the right thing for his people. And Chief, showing a shred of vulnerability, hit different, dude. Like, when the weapon goes, like, for even just a moment, goes full caring girlfriend mode for a second, just says, hey, are you okay being here? And John actually answers, no, not really. I'm so glad our boy in the Pelican gave Chief a hug at the end of the game, because this guy needs one, okay? I love this game, okay? I'm gonna say it right now. I think Halo is back. I give it like a 9 or 10 out of 10, personally. I really like this game. I recommend this game. Go buy this game. Is that clear enough? Cool. All right, yeah. But enough about what I think. Is the game actually good? Man, another long-awaited one, huh? I mean, it's no 19 years like Metroid Dread, but still, 6 years is a decent chunk of change, and Halo Infinite, Halo 6, is finally here. But seriously though, if you've liked Halo in the past, now is a great time. I'll see you all tomorrow, next year.